Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, October 20th, 2021. 2020. All right, 10/20/21. 10/20/2021. Sorry. Just want to get that right for you. And, we're back and live for another show. I don't feel live. I feel like lying down and going back to sleep. Greg will be pleased to know that I got my flu shot yesterday. I got a couple of immunizations taken care of yesterday, and let me tell you, I'm kind of achy. It wasn't the flu shot. Don't fear the flu shot. Should I start a panic? Fear the shingles shot. Holy mackerel. Anyway, that's better than getting shingles. I can assure you of that. But not comfortable. That one actually was considerably more uncomfortable than the flu shot. The flu shot was nothing, so do get your flu shot. Just like for me, luckily, the coronavirus vaccination was nothing as well, so I highly recommend it even if it isn't nothing, because it's better than death. That's all I can tell you. What more do you want to know about the coronavirus vaccination? All right, the Kagro in the Morning radio show, if we can actually say it without screwing it up, is live now. This I am reliably informed of by Bill each morning. Kagro X, me, David Waldman, will now begin speaking. Here it is. Ready? This is it. If you need translation into any one of the 500 possible languages, please place the plastic headphone over your ear and dial into your preferred language. It's just like the UN. We ought to work like that here. You could be listening to this show from anywhere around the world, and including underwater, as we surmised possibly was going on in the morning tweet. Just trying to come up with something for the morning post, letting you know we were live. Yesterday was Tuesday, which we decided rhymed with Booze Day, but it's too early to start drinking. Wednesday rhymes with, I don't know what, Ben's Day, right? So watch out for decompression illness. Take care in making your way to the surface if you've been scuba diving this morning. I doubt it, but you never know. It's a very wide, wide world. All right, Greg Dworkin has been rounding up his raft of stories. Speaking of nautical excursions. Were we? I don't know. We could say that we were. And many things going on this morning. Many people are saying many things. This is true. Lots of people talking about the continued defiance from Trump and Bannon of their subpoenas from the January 6th committee. And, we're not likely to see a lot of action on that in the immediate future. Actually, I could check and see whether any indication is given from the morning roundup from the majority leader's office. We'll just take a look and see. Day starts off with 10 suspension bills to occupy time while members get their heads around what they're going to do with the rest of the day. Actually, not too much slated for Wednesday, which is a little bit of a surprise. 10 new suspensions. Oh, there'll be 15 1-minutes per side. That's an awful lot, too, as well. So up to 30 annoying speeches by people who have nothing else to do this morning. Sometimes they're worthwhile, but rarely. And then 10 suspension bills, and then possible passage of postponed suspension bills that I guess were considered yesterday and weren't voted on yesterday, probably because, I don't know whether they were actually waiting for somebody to show up and vote, or whether Marjorie Taylor Greene did her usual request for adjournment and they just said screw it, and we'll wait for the postponement. We'll postpone the suspensions considerations until tomorrow. But at any rate, 8 suspensions postponed from yesterday, plus 10 more today. So what a fun day! There'll be roll call votes probably on all 18 of them because Marjorie Taylor Greene has nothing else to do. Such important considerations as, let's see, renaming the post office. If I saw correctly, I think they had did they say a Patsy Cline post offices out there? I'll have to take another look at what's going on. That could make the day exciting, I suppose. All all today. The post offices. Let's see. There's Artificial Intelligence and Counterterrorism Oversight Enhancement Act. That's somehow a suspension. I guess everybody wants that. Guidance Clarity Act of 2021. Guidance as to what? I don't know. We'll find out later. Post offices in Irvine, California, redesignated here as the Tuskegee Airman Lieutenant Colonel Robert J. Friend Memorial Post Office Building. It's going to cost us a fortune in letters alone, but well worth the time. Let's see, a couple of cops having post offices named after them. Ben Gilman, right? I think that's a former member of Congress that they're naming this for, in Middletown, New York. Let's see, anything else of interest? I'm pretty sure I saw this. Let's see. One here in Winchester, Virginia. There it is. That would be the one, right? Winchester, Virginia, obviously the Patsy Cline post office. It's her hometown. That should have been the tip. Okay, so there you go. And here in the Northern Virginia area. Is Winchester Loudoun County? I don't know. It's on North Loudoun Street, the post office is. But I think Winchester might be next county over. I'm not positive of that, though. It's 2 counties. 2 counties over. All right. Well, I had no idea. Now there's an expanse between us. But if you're looking to visit the Patsy Cline post office, you can find it on North Loudoun Street in Winchester, Virginia. Also, like the local, it was the headquarters of like White House Apple Juice and the apple orchards there. So plenty of apple juice and apple cider available to you if you were making your way out to Winchester. Is very nice. They have a nice walking mall, nice place to be. It's way out there. You can't really commute to D.C. from it. Not that easily anyway. But nice place. Been there. Probably going back. Now I'll go to the post office. You should too. All right. Well, I think that's it in terms of what's happening on the floor. I was looking to see whether they might be getting ready to schedule a vote on the full House vote on the contempt citation or the referral to the DOJ for Steve Bannon. But no such plans for today. They still have tomorrow to work on that. I don't know whether they're going to move that quickly or not, or whether they like the idea of having it linger in the headlines and lots of opinion pieces being written about how dangerous it is not to insist that he be prosecuted. In the meantime, though, that also means plenty of time for Democrats to get frustrated with the glacial pace of the DOJ, although they can't be blamed for the glacial pace until we send them the referral. So, I don't know. We'll see when they decide to bring that to the floor. Greg Dworkin is here. We'll decide to bring him to the floor right now. Mind your step so that you don't end up on the floor. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. Well, today is Wednesday.
It is.
So the full House will vote on the contempt of Congress thing on Thursday.
Okay. That's the answer.
And,
I didn't see it anywhere.
What happens after that remains to be seen, of course. But Liz Cheney had words for her fellow Republicans saying, look, it's about the truth, and you guys need to really hone in on that. And, of course, Trump's going to fight everything. He's going to fight his executive privilege battles, which including Steve Bannon and probably includes Fox News and anybody else who's ever said anything nice about him, which is ridiculous. And hopefully in the Nixon era, fighting against release of things that needed to be released was actually adjudicated fairly quickly by the Supreme Court. So it can be done.
Yeah, I mean,
whether or not it's going to take forever remains to be seen, but it can be done quickly, relatively quickly.
Not a great Supreme Court panel for us to have to deal with, to be sure.
But still, there are precedents, and they don't always follow precedents. But if enough of them do, sometimes they look and say, we are totally partisan hacks, but this is still a 9-0 no-brainer.
I hope so. I would just point out that
because it's important for us to send a message.
That would be nice. I hope that's the message they send, and not the message that one of the biggest, most high-profile fights between Congress and the executive branch, although it was the then current executive branch, was over the contempt citation for Ann Gorsuch, whose son now sits on the Supreme Court and might have feelings about how aggressively Congress ought to be allowed to act in prosecuting its contempt charges.
Well, the other message they could send is 6-3 win for Trump because we are everything you said we always were.
Yeah, I mean, that's possibility too. But yeah,
And
legally
now that we're
speaking, they're
6-3,
not on
we
good
don't care.
grounds. Yeah, well, we'll see. And,
We'll just give speeches about how Supreme Court should be nonpartisan.
Right. Angry speeches about
Yeah,
that.
well, it's to make up for our 6-3 vote, we'll just give speeches.
Yeah. We didn't do that. Or at
We're
least
not
not for the
Congress. We
reasons
don't
you
send
thought.
sternly worded memos.
Yeah, well, they don't have to. They do to get to just do their voting thing. All right.
Well, but, I don't want to let all of that drown out the big story of the day.
Oh, what was that? I knew there was
In
something.
Israel, divers discovered a sword and other artifacts dating from the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192.
Oh, my sword.
The effort
where
by
that
Richard
went.
Lionheart and others to recover Jerusalem for Christendom
Couldn't
after
even
the
recover
shattering
their sword.
defeat by Saladin's jihad in 1187.
Mm-hmm.
I think Saladin was playing the Red Sox. And it was just absolutely shattering. But, the thing is that they never did succeed in capturing Jerusalem back for Christians. And
That's true.
so it's...
So their sword fell off. They couldn't do it.
Well, apparently it was recovered off the coast by a diver. So
Right.
I don't know if the
Problematic.
guy fell in the water. If
Oh.
you're wearing armor and a sword, you're not going to swim very well. So that's the
No,
end.
but you might find that.
I am
guy.
undefeatable. Oh, I can't swim.
Right. I suppose if you
invincible.
just found the sword, though, that would tell you something. I mean, I guess.
Anyway, I
unless it
sent
was-
you a picture of the sword. It's totally barnacle encrusted,
Well,
but
that's
very
the way we like
reminiscent of Assassin's Creed Valhalla's version of Excalibur,
Wow.
which I also sent you a picture of.
Ah.
And
yeah.
my
I
big
believe
question
that. Yeah.
was whether or not this particular sword can be upgraded and whether it has special perks.
Maybe.
Because that's what's important, and I want to see if any
Sure.
achievements have been unlocked by,
It's a big
finding
sword.
it.
I wondered whether somebody threw it in the water thinking it was Excalibur, and I don't know. But it's not a lake. That they
Lady
threw
of the
it into.
lake, take your sword. Oh, this isn't a lake. This is the ocean.
Yeah,
Doesn't work
right.
that way.
Mediterranean. It was all right. Well, that's nice. See, I knew there was
More
some
like
scuba
Poseidon
diving
than,
element to this
Lady
show.
of the Lake, but that's how it goes.
Yep. All right. Well, scuba diver of the sea found it. It's better than having it found by a chicken of the sea, I guess.
I suppose. Anyway, that's the big news. So, other big news is, you can take your choice. Why don't we start with a little politics stuff?
All right.
So I gave you, or if I didn't give you, I should give you, Steny Hoyer's comment about the Thursday vote. Here it is officially.
It calls everybody his friends. Probably.
Hoyer announces Thursday vote on Contempt of Congress resolution. The bipartisan House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack has been tasked with finding answers. We must get to the bottom. Mr. Bannon must help answer these questions. He owes it to the country to testify. Yes. So
Mr.
Liz
Bannon
Cheney
can
said
get us to the
it better
bottom.
because she went after her fellow Republicans for not really being slaves to the truth, which they should be. And related legal stuff, FBI agents yesterday swarmed Washington home of Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska.
That guy.
Deripaska.
Yes. One
Oleg.
of, I don't know, 50 homes he probably has, but okay. That's a good one to swarm.
We'll call him George for short. Speaking of George Conway lives next door and went out and took pictures.
That means Kellyanne Conway.
It's a very exclusive area.
Yeah. It's a nice house. I'd swarm it. 9 out of 10. Would
Why
swarm again.
was the FBI there? We don't know yet. We do know that there's a lot of extortion and racketeering stuff floating around, but we'll see whether it has any relevance to our own politics. But speaking of
with
our
the
own
House.
politics,
Yes.
it's gotten to the point, and I know this is going to be hard to believe, and it was probably hard for them.
What?
But Politico wrote a story entitled Dems Edge Closer to Ditching Disarray.
Oh, that's incredible.
Well, actually, it's not the Dems that are ditching disarray, it's Politico, but that's another story. Centrists are getting down to brass tacks. Progressives are making concessions. And party leaders insist they're close to a deal this month. In fact, Chris Coons with the vibe check, according to Heather Kagel from Politico. The gaps are closing. The vibe in our caucus is different. There's a lot of reasons why these next 10 days are critical. I guess he's got Tom Friedman writing his material. And the fact is that there are some Democrats that are optimistic it'll get done by the end of the week, or certainly by Halloween.
Oh, well,
What will happen,
later.
in other words, is that by the end of the week they'll announce a framework
Another
for
framework.
reconciliation,
Sure, why not?
which will satisfy the progressives so they can go ahead and vote yes on infrastructure, which will satisfy Sinema, especially in Manchin, who insist that that get done first. And the way that you get it done first is that you promise to agree to support a framework while saying yes to the actual infrastructure thing. In other words, the exact same thing from a month ago, except this time they mean it.
Oh, well, all right. That's a better explanation for it. Sinema did give a hint that she might be flexible. She did say something the other day, if you put any stock in it, of anything, she says. She did say that, I'm not saying I won't vote for reconciliation. I'm saying I won't vote for it until infrastructure is passed.
She's been very clear about that in the beginning. Everybody understands what that means.
Yeah, maybe.
Right? Infrastructure comes first, even if by 35 seconds.
Yeah. All right. Well, if they can give that to her and get her on board, I guess that's good. There's a lot of indication in the writing this morning that breakthroughs are imminent.
Meanwhile, while all of this is happening, and I think this is important backdrop, why are the Democrats, especially the progressive Democrats, making concessions, you might ask?
Yes.
These things are important.
They
use
that
the world.
word.
We got to save the world. So, climate change. And voting rights are key because without that, we don't have a democracy. So why would you make any concessions whatsoever on some of the things that are most important to us? Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of answers to that. One of them is from Simon Rosenberg, who's nothing if not a solid progressive.
Right. Might take an hour to read it, but...
Lots of polls being thrown out there now, so let's start the day with a few that question whether the new leftward lean of Democrats is backed up by data, public opinion, and is smart. First, there's very little support among Democratic voters for the party to move to the left. Navigator's survey report among Democratic voters, 71% say keep the party the same and move to the center, 40% say move to the center, and 29% say move left.
All right. I guess.
Or left.
Yes.
So,
right.
I mean, the point is, people like progressive policies, but they hate the label.
That seems likely.
They hate the label. They'd rather be called centrists and vote for leftist policies than be labeled leftists and vote for centrist policies.
I think that's probably true. I don't know why exactly, but seem to get better
but,
press.
Don't fight City Hall. Don't fight the market here.
I guess. I'm a centrist now.
Yeah, don't fight the wind. But I've always said that. I happen to be a centrist. My particular brand of politics is exactly at the center of the universe, and people are to the left of me and to the right of me. So I don't have a problem with this.
They're all crazy.
They're all crazy, but I'm the only one that's right. But that's what most people think. So it's not surprising that they would come to that particular conclusion.
Right.
Okay.
I guess that's
so. He's right about that. Next up, the words progressive and liberal are deeply unpopular and should be considered toxic in the battleground, where the Democrat is much more popular. So call yourself a Democrat.
Oh, well.
Favorable, unfavorable. Conservative, 44-41, which is a +3 with the public. Democrat, 47-49, -2. You might think that's bad till you look at Republican, which is 40-56, -16.
Okay.
Right? And progressive is 33-44, -11.
Okay. A little less so than
So if you're going to brand from a Democratic messaging point of view, it's a Democratic party.
I guess so.
So Joe Biden has Democratic principles, and these are Democratic proposals. And labeling them as progressives versus mods has been a disaster in a lot of ways, partly because the media gets all of it wrong.
Oh, well, yeah.
I mean, to start with.
Problematic.
What is a centrist? What does a moderate mean? Well, What are their principles? Well, I don't want that. That's not moderate. That's not centrist. Mm-hmm. What's Kristen Sinema's big ask? I don't want increased tax on corporations. And what's Manchin's big ask? I don't want climate change stuff to be too restrictive. Well, that's not centrist. That's not moderate. No. That's bought and sold.
That's the only words they have for them, apparently.
I know, and that's the only words they have for them. So, the whole idea of positioning it is bad. But then if you just, pound it in day after day after day, her emails for months, the public gets the impression that, well, maybe that's not a good thing.
Yeah, I guess
Is it true? No. But, and then, of course, they have no responsibility whatsoever because all they're doing is telling the story.
I don't feel like that's right.
I don't feel like that's right either, but that's what's happening. So the many commentators, says Simon Rosenberg, who've argued that COVID has opened up an opportunity for return to a more activist government may have gotten ahead of their skis a bit. Here's Gallup: Americans revert to favoring reduced government role. And in the 5 months since the president started selling his big, bold, progressive, transformational, historic $3.5 trillion spending plan, the president's approval rating has dropped 20 points. Partly the economy, partly COVID, partly Afghanistan, but not much of that. And so all of that, because it's the economy and COVID, definitely could rebound. People are beginning to think about blaming Biden for inflation and the supply chain issues. And we know that from Morning Consult poll.
Well, don't.
So those are the headwinds, but they're all fixable. They're all manageable. I mean, you can't fix the supply chain, but you can manage expectations on all of these things. So I'm not that pessimistic. And remember, whatever you want to say about Democrats, people don't like Republicans even more. The problem is Democrats are supposedly under control of the levers of government, which we all know isn't true. And because of that, they're going to be blamed more, and that's expected. That still doesn't mean losses. And I'm still anxious to see what happens with Terry McAuliffe in a couple of weeks, and then how the press explains what they just saw. And I think we'll get a better idea of how and by then we should have some sort of agreement with the infrastructure framework thing, and we'll see how they handle that. And, again, if you're going to do Dems in disarray for months after month after month after month, week after week after week, and then say, okay, well, they somehow or other passed this amazing, marvelous piece of legislative engineering that we all said couldn't happen, but they did it anyway. That's a 24-hour story. Let's go on to the next thing that we have issues with.
Right. Certainly.
And that's not, I'm just setting your expectations because that's what generally happens.
That's true. I'd love to be able to head it off and not have it happen. And the best you can do.
Well, the way you do it is you keep writing about how amazing it was that all this stuff that they said couldn't happen happened. That's why the McAuliffe thing is so important. It's a lot easier to call them out on that one if McAuliffe wins than it is calling them out on the infrastructure. Well, we told you minute by minute how difficult it was, and we were right, and it got done. You kept telling us it wasn't going to get done. Well, at the time, it didn't get done. See, we were right.
And now it did, which is what we said.
But we said else. We've written 15 stories this week about what if McAuliffe loses and how nervous Dems are and what happens. And, but what if he wins? Well, that's old news. Let's just move on.
Yeah, he was governor last time anyway, so who cares? Well, I did read an interesting piece yesterday about that did set that up as a possibly, I don't think anybody was paying attention in the mainstream press corps, but it really would be an exceptional achievement for Democrats with 50 in the Senate, no less, and a razor-thin majority in the House to pass 2 reconciliation bills in the first year in office for Biden. That would be amazing. It's just
and the person who should get credit for that and probably will get credit for that is Nancy Pelosi.
Okay. And if you get tired of
because
giving her credit, you can give it to me.
Her job is difficult. I should remind Seth Moulton and everybody else who ran for it.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to be in that position. It's very tiring, I am sure.
So Simon Rosenberg's last slide here in his PowerPoint presentation on Twitter. This is a slide from a June deck by prominent Dem pollsters, which found reducing government spending and reducing the national debt to be higher priorities with the public than creating jobs.
Okay.
If that's what the public thinks, you have to be really careful about overselling your policies. I think you take the same policies and you call them centrists. What do you care?
I guess.
No, we have to call them progressive because, no, you don't. You want it to sell or do you not want it to sell?
Afterwards. But, I'd rather they pass than get naming credit for it, certainly.
Right.
If I can only choose one.
We want to sell you these foods in the store. So we're going to call them new, improved, tasty. Well, why don't you just call them the chemicals that are in it? Why don't you put that out first? Well,
sure.
That doesn't sell. It keeps them, in the store so that they don't go bad and we make money. But you can't sell it on that. So it's in it, but we just don't mention it.
I guess.
Well, here's a concept that I think politicians should, go with as well. There are certain things that are simply not popular. Spending a lot of money in the American public is not popular. It's just not. You could argue about why it should be. You're wasting your time. You're wasting your breath. Same thing with immigration. You got to be very careful about how you talk about it, if you talk about it at all. Instead, talk about things that people really like. Creating jobs is great.
Yes.
Expand access to health care. Talk about that more than what it's going to cost to do it. Not because you shouldn't you talk about it or hide it or figure out how to do it, but that shouldn't be the emphasis.
I'm told they like kitchen
know
tables.
This. They have really simple bumper sticker things that they do. No new taxes. Well, how are you going to govern and run the country? No new taxes. What else do you need to know? Well, no new taxes.
Right.
We're the party you know.
Well, they're searching around for their new bumper sticker.
But
they haven't found it yet.
You have to remember, they don't really care about governance.
Right. That makes it easier. That's
right?
true.
So, the whole argument that Democrats are way better at governance and Republicans are way better at getting elected, remains true to a certain extent. So you got to be careful about that.
Okay. I will take care of that in that regard. All right.
And that'll get us through the first half hour. And then after the break, we're going to talk a little bit about vaccines and what the FDA is doing, what CDC is going to do.
Yeah. All right.
That sort of.
Well, while we were waiting for them to make the vaccine available to the youngest kids, I was at the doctor. I just said, well, I might as well
also
take any vaccines you've got. Right, that too. I said, give me whatever you got. I already had the COVID vaccine. Is there anything left vaccine-wise that I haven't had? You might as well just...
And that's how you end up with a shingles vaccine.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable.
And yellow fever.
Oh, yeah.
And like 9 others that they happen to have in the store. I'll just take them before they expire.
Right, well, the shelves
were
a public service. Full, so I said, give me a couple of those things. Unlike what
just put them in the other arm.
Oh, I got him in both arms. Plus, I had a blood draw. I was like a pincushion yesterday. So, I'm feeling great. Woohoo!
Yeah, good.
I'm going to go get some
lighter,
horse paste. I'll be right back. Yeah, I lost weight. Little tiny bit. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still marveling over this sword that they found in the Mediterranean. I guess that's the only thing there is off the coast of Israel, right? Mediterranean. They haven't moved any of the oceans since I've been.
I was chatting
in school,
online this morning with a friend about that and said that sword looks great, but it needs an upgrade so we can see what kind of perks it has. And they said to me, no. They mean they're going to have to refurbish it. They're going to. And I said, no, we're talking about perks here and upgrades, just like in those video games. And I sent a picture, and he sent back a LOL. I guess I take myself too seriously sometimes.
I guess. This is really fascinating, though. Imagine scuba diving. I mean, it's odd that
but the sword is like a big sword. This is like a big
huge.
Two-hander, with one of those cross hilts, just as you'd imagine.
Oh, it's very medieval looking. And the picture, or at least the still from the video, makes it look like it was just lying there on top of the sand, clearly a sword. I wonder if it was half buried or something. But what a discovery, swimming around. Huh. All right, well
that's
won't
part of
get
the world where you can find those
passed,
things just sort of hanging out there.
I guess so.
Dead Sea Scrolls, that kind of thing.
Right.
So back to the American newly discovered world, the New World. The Politico playbook kind of breaks down the Biden plan a little bit, which I think is important.
Yes, okay.
So Productive conversation, they said. There's very little love for the child tax credit. It was one of the crowning achievements of Biden's first legislative victory in the pandemic relief bill, says Politico, but Biden told lawmakers they may extend the enhanced CTC for only a year. That could be a big problem for Democrats, but the thinking is this is the one you can cut back on because it's going to be popular enough that the GOP might even do it. That's what happened with Medicaid. So that's not, terribly out of line with historical issues. The least surprising thing is free community college is out. Okay. Bernie's dental plan is still in play.
Dental plan.
Yeah, in order to add it to Medicare, which does not cover dental or vision.
Part of your body, but whatever. Yeah, somehow it got left out.
I promise you, as you start to get older, you notice that those things are not in your insurance.
Yep. No, it's been a long-term project.
Right. Really some family programs are scaled back. And the fuzziest part is climate. Biden danced around the climate proposals. Given Joe Manchin's resistance, that's not surprising. But, part of the issue there is that he may not get it in the bill, and then he does it by executive order and then fights about it, which would be okay as long as it gets done. What's next? We mentioned Monday, lawmakers are surprisingly upbeat about getting this done by Halloween. Tuesday's talks fueled the optimism, but Biden still has to deal with Manchin and Sinema. And we don't know where they are in this working framework. We could get an idea today. The fact that they don't know doesn't stop them from writing about it, folks. That's why you're getting a minute-to-minute. Well, she smiled. He twitched. She moved her fingers. He raised his shoulder. I don't care. Let's find out what they do by the end of October.
Never abates, right? Okay. We need words. Put some in there.
But the whole thing about vote on infrastructure, get a framework for reconciliation is still very much alive.
Yeah.
Other good news,
right, yes.
Texas legislature adjourned its last special session of the year without acting on Trump's demand for more audits of the 2020 elections.
Okay.
So they said a lot of things and then ignored what Trump said.
That's good. That's because he's not the president.
Well, tell that to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, well.
Right. Also, another very important story, Mark Zuckerberg wants to change Facebook's name and rebrand the company with a new name. They didn't say what name it is, although my Twitter friend Elizabeth Vittori said they ought to just call it Faceplant.
That's available, I think.
Right, it's available and pretty much covers what's going on there.
Rebranding Facebook. I mean, they should have a long time ago, but okay. It'll be really interesting to watch and see whether it works.
Right. The big stories, why public health faces a crisis across the United States. Basically, everything you see about school boards and know about school boards, they're doing it to public health officials in your state and in your community.
Right, and they were doing that first.
Yeah, so because public health doesn't have a constituency, you didn't hear about it till they started doing it at school boards. But it's bad.
Well, we luckily heard a little bit about it because we paid attention to it. But a lot of people are only coming to that realization now, and better that they do it now rather than never.
Years ago, I told them they were vulnerable to this because they do not have a constituency, and they assiduously work to not have one.
That's
and then this is what happens when you do that.
It's a delicate thing to deal with developing a constituency without becoming politicized. But I mean, it should work given that your constituency should be everyone.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Problem is, there are a lot of people out there who think what's healthy for me is the opposite of what's healthy for me, or what's healthy for me is what is okay for horses, and I should have some too, or whatever. Yeah. Well,
meanwhile, CDC is now reporting COVID cases and deaths by vaccination status. We've talked about this on the show a little bit, but I sent another really nice, simple graph, very top of the list I sent you. Rates of COVID cases or deaths by vaccination status. And you can see a relatively flat curve for the fully vaccinated and a relatively steep curve for the unvaccinated.
Yes.
So flattening the curve, that's what this means.
The new meaning of flatten the curve.
Well, that's what it always meant.
Well, yeah, it's a curve, but it was a hospitalization curve.
Means don't get so many cases.
Now it's a death curve. Yeah.
Cases or deaths, because they both look the same.
All right. Yeah, but okay. So that's still even a little bit different. The last curve we were really worried about was the hospitalization curve.
Yeah, but the original flatten the curve, don't forget, came from St. Louis and Philadelphia from the 1917 pandemic. And the idea was flatten the curve by not getting as many people sick by canceling the parades and not doing public gatherings and wear masks.
Yes.
So don't get so many cases. That's the
Way
original
back
flatten
when.
the curve, and that's exactly what this is.
Flatten ye thy curve.
We
Not quite that
adopted
old, but-
that to say, okay, hospitals. But that's because we didn't really know whether or not we could actually stop cases. Now that we have vaccines, we can. And so this returns to the original meaning.
Okay, then. That's a nice history lesson. I had forgotten that it was something that was in use in 1917 when it was, I guess, hopeless to flatten the hospitalization curve. All right. Well, anyway, it's the same curve, and it will look largely the same. And this does look quite like what they were saying about, what was it, 11? You're 11 times more likely to die from coronavirus if you contract it while unvaccinated than if you are vaccinated, and that's about what it looks like.
Right.
That curve will be different, yeah. Oh, and of course, Republicans having a field day trying to convince people that the Colin Powell case means the opposite of what it means.
Yeah, but that didn't last.
We've learned a lot about his health status.
I said on Monday I'm not going to play Bill Frist and tell you about his medical history without knowing it. It turns out he had multiple myeloma. So he had a blood cancer that decreases your immune reactivity to vaccines.
Well, what do you know?
That's kind of important in terms of deciding what's going on. The very fact that he was older means that the vaccines weren't going to be as effective as they are in younger people. But you want to add that to the mix, there's no way.
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad that his private health history had to be trotted out to do it. But I'm glad that, I guess I don't know whether the family objected at all, but well, you might as well use it as a teaching example. You got to give people the facts, even if they're going to ignore them. So, yes, and even without his health history, the fact that he was 84 would go a long way towards explaining it.
Right. Here's a reference from Business Insider, by the way, for your readers and listeners later, when Scott Anderson sums up the show, how 2 U.S. cities responded to the 1918 flu very differently and what we can learn from these mistakes. This is a story from April 2020. Philadelphia and St. Louis were both hit by the flu outbreak of 1918-19, but one city suffered a death rate of approximately 358 per 100,000, the other 748 per 100,000. A different time from today, but there's still lessons we can draw from how Philadelphia's slow action to respond to the pandemic left its citizens dangerously vulnerable. And
right.
St. Louis then went to lift measures too early and had a second wave. We've had 4, so you'd think we'd learn, but of course we don't because we're America. Yay, us.
Yes. Now we know what matters is what kind of cheese you put on the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we learned in Philly.
Well, it's a Philadelphia story.
Right.
Starring Katharine Hepburn. U.S. High Court won't block vaccines for Maine health workers. The U.S. Supreme Court declined Tuesday to block a vaccine requirement imposed on Maine healthcare workers, the latest defeat for opponents of vaccine mandates. It was the first time the Supreme Court weighed in on statewide vaccine mandates. It previously rejected challenges for New York City teachers and Indiana University staff and students. Breyer rejected the emergency appeal but left the door open to try again. Because I guess you have to do that if you're like the Supreme Court.
I mean,
I don't know why.
You don't, but they decided to. Okay. They wanted to get it right. All right, so this was the first time they actually took one up, but I think in passing on the other cases, they just let the state rules stand.
Yeah, and then they specifically passed on this one.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that I thought, and we were talking about this show for weeks as well, so I feel like we've covered this for your listeners and for your family. Mix and match COVID boosters, why they just might work, said Chuck Dunn.
Because they're so crazy.
The FDA may authorize booster shots, this is from the New York Times. The vaccine's different from the ones that Americans originally received. The science behind the move is promising. How is it different? Because the second shot amplifies the response by working differently. Studies of experimental HIV vaccines also suggested mixing vaccines could create a broader, more potent response than multiple doses of a single vaccine.
Okay.
And the pandemic gave scientists new opportunities to test this whole concept, so they did it with AstraZeneca. And giving a Pfizer to AstraZeneca turned out working a little better. So what about boosters? Well, the FDA is still expected to have words about what they recommend for mix and match by the end of the week. Today's Wednesday, so we got a couple more days.
Okay.
The agency is considering adjusting the language on the labels for all 3 authorized vaccines to indicate that providers can administer a different authorized vaccine at their discretion. If that happens, that means that the paperwork has to be redone, and that's why after the FDA advisory committee says something, then has to go to the full FDA, then to CDC, and ultimately the government has to change the write and then change and publish and then get those little pieces of paper folded up and then stuck in all those little vaccine vial boxes. And that just takes a while.
Bag and all kinds of things, right? Okay. I was wondering who's producing all that paper that gets stapled to my prescription bag.
Yeah, well, if you get it at a CVS, the receipt alone is generally long enough to substitute for toilet paper should you run out during this supply chain issue.
Yes. You're supposed to use it like breadcrumbs. I think you leave one end in the CVS and then unroll it.
Yeah, that way you can find your way back for your second shingles shot.
Right.
Don't forget, shingles is 2 shots.
Yes, I know, unfortunately. So I think 2 to 6 months later.
May I ask a personal question? Thank you very much. I will. Did your insurance pay for it?
Yes, I believe
Turns out Medicare will not.
Oh, well.
So I got mine. I got my 2 shots, but I had to pay for it out of pocket.
I looked it up.
Which is one of the reasons why Bernie's proposal about, things like dental and vision and hearing not being covered by Medicare is important to people who happen to be on Medicare.
Dental. It's not a dental.
No, but I'm saying that Medicare doesn't cover.
That's another thing they don't.
Doesn't come close to covering everything.
Right.
Most people have
people want
medicals
Cadillac
of some kind.
Plans like not getting shingles because there's a vaccine for it now.
Well, I planned not to be over 65, but that didn't work out. So now I'm on plan
One
B
or the
here.
other. Right. Okay. Well, that one will work too. It did cover it. I looked it up beforehand, but my doctor asked me about it last time and said you should check and make sure that it's covered because not all plans cover it. And then I looked, and then I found out that the thing I looked at
it's nearly $200 if you don't get it covered.
Right. It can be very expensive
per shot. So you got 2 shots.
Yeah, but this one appears to be covered, and good thing too because it's. I don't think I should have to pay for that kind of discomfort, but. Maybe the ones that you pay for don't hurt as much.
Anyway, in addition to that, the White House today is detailing plans to roll out COVID-19 vaccine for children ages 5 to 11.
Yes, right.
Now, CDC is still thinking about it, but the White House on Wednesday, that's today, unveiled its plans to roll out COVID-19 vaccines. The Biden administration has secured enough vaccine supply to vaccinate 28 million kids, 5 to 11, who would become eligible if the vaccine is authorized, and will help equip more than 25,000 pediatric and primary care offices, hundreds of community health centers and rural health clinics, as well as tens of thousands of pharmacies to administer the shots.
Right, the same ones.
Today, the Biden administration is announcing a plan to ensure that if a vaccine is authorized to children, it's quickly distributed. The next thing will be if it's an EUA, will it become formally approved? If it's formally approved, will schools like the LA and New York City systems mandate it with the largest school systems going first, and then does that follow? And then do you start fighting about that the way you fight about everything else at school boards?
Sure, why not?
So that's what you can look forward to.
Okay. Right, well, let's roll it out. I think we already have the freezers, so might as well fill them back up.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing. Yes. But not all vaccines are equal in terms of storage, as you pointed out. And not all vaccines are the same in regard to choices. So if you're, let's say, an average pediatrician's office, you probably don't have the freezer you need to get a COVID vaccine just stored there. And even if it's free, you may simply not have the space and capacity to handle COVID vaccines, especially if there's more than one. Which one do you do?
Yeah.
And is there going to be a J&J for kids? And how does that work? And so, there's a lot more that we have to hear from in terms of planning for it. But chances are it's going to be federally qualified community health centers,
freezers,
otherwise known as FCHCs, and visiting nurse clinics and other large scale, in urban areas at least, centers, just like you did for your original COVID shot, rather than your pediatrician's office. Some pediatrician's office might be able to do it. In rural areas, rural health clinics will probably be able to do it. But the logistics of this are going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, see if we can work it out, and I guess get ready for
Again,
another round of
pediatricians are
resistance
predicting
as well.
only about half of their patients will get it right away. So there's not going to be long lines. So if you want to get your kid a jab, trying to avoid, if you want to get your kid shot, if you want to get your kid a jab, then you're probably going to be able to do this.
All right. There's a lollipop at the end of the road. So
for the parent, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully we'll see that happen shortly. We've been kind of on the edge of our seat for a while now waiting for this approval. And I don't know. So what? Maybe this week? Is that what you're thinking? I feel like we say that all the time.
Maybe this week. Not sure.
I
think the FDA may not take it up till next week. It's the latest I saw.
Okay. Can they give it out for trick-or-treaters?
No, but it'll be in time for Thanksgiving.
Oh, all right. One holiday following close upon another. Okay.
Yeah. So, get your Christmas decorations ready because it's October.
Right. And Valentine's
oddly
Day
enough, speaking of climate change, and hopefully there is something that either is in the bill or that Biden can do with executive orders. Mm-hmm. It is now, if I'm not mistaken, October 20th.
Yes, right.
An August day for many reasons. But I don't mean an August day, October day. August, not August. But October 20th here in Connecticut, we haven't had a frost yet. It's like the first time in years we haven't had a frost as late as October 20th. So climate change is real.
Yeah, I guess
that's weather, not climate. But, it's just, I'm just saying.
Well, a lot of
weather,
anecdotal
climate,
observations about weather.
Neil deGrasse Tyson had the best example of the difference between the two when he and his dog did a meandering walk down the beach. And the squiggly line back and forth and back and forth and back and forth is weather. But the general direction of one end of the beach to the other end of the beach, that's climate. So when you have climate change, it's inexorable. But weather can vary, and so it's not a straight line.
Yeah, right. I mean, we've seen that enough with anytime it snows and a member of Congress brings a snowball into the building.
Yeah, Jim Inhofe.
What about global warming? Yeah.
He's got like snowballs in his freezer for this purpose.
He's got snowballs in his head. All right. Well, that wraps it up. I'm seeing a lot of similar local anecdotes about weather.
California's on fire. There's a local anecdote.
Okay, there's one. Lake Tahoe at low levels.
Some of my birder friends. I mean, I love to take pictures of my morning birds at my feeder, but I'm not like a serious birder about this.
Okay, right. No big.
But some of my birder friends are seeing like Rocky Mountain birds in Connecticut that don't normally migrate here.
Well,
and they're all wondering whether the fire and smoke is sort of pushing them a little east.
Huh. I guess that's a good explanation for it. Plus all the food you're putting out.
But we put that food out every year, and we don't usually see Rocky Mountain birds.
Yes, but this year it's trendy in their area.
Well, it was candy corn, I think, we put in the feeder. That did it.
I've never
anyway, that's my Wednesday show. The sanitation engineers, of course, are on the way. Abby's outside. You haven't heard her recently because I've gotten into the habit of putting her outside during the show, which is fine for this time of year since it's warmer than usual.
Yes, right. Later than usual.
But as winter comes, you're going to hear a little bit more about Abby. She's very vocal about what she hears on the show.
Okay. Well, that's fine. And she can give the weather report. If you hear her, it's cold in Connecticut.
Oh, by the way, and I should end the show the way we started and just remind people that January 6th committee vote to hold Steve Bannon in contempt of Congress, it was unanimous.
It was, I think, 9-0.
Yeah. So just like the Supreme Court should be.
Sure.
And the point of all of that is, again, the wisdom of constructing the January 6th committee the way it needed to be done without the Jim Jordans of the world.
Right.
It was unanimous.
On it. Good.
That's why it was done. People forget that, but it was a good move.
Yeah, and then you can report that.
Well, but it won't look bipartisan. No, that's not the important thing. Whether it looks bipartisan or not, what's important is that when you get a Steve Bannon who's resisting telling the public what happened on January 6th, you need it to be unanimous.
Well, it was. So well played. Yeah, Right, so bipartisan as well. There's no getting around it. You know, the trick is if there's one Democrat on it, it's bipartisan. Here's two Republicans.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to do the trick. Okay.
Anyway, that's
Very
it.
Good.
And we'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk some more.
Yep.
And enjoy
Okay.
the day. Enjoy your warmer than usual fall. Fall is lovely this time of year. The apple crop is great. It's
the best
in
time
New
of
York
year for fall.
And Connecticut, so that part's good. We'll see what happens with the wet fall we're having, because the leaves won't be quite as spectacular, and I'm a little bit worried about maple syrup production for the winter. But we'll see.
Shelves. Yeah. All right.
There's always Canada.
Are they having it better?
Well, they're a little bit further north,
syrup?
and so maybe it'll stay cold enough to actually make maple syrup.
Okay. Well, I hope so. All right. Great. Thanks, Greg. And fingers crossed for the syrup as well. People are big fans. All right. We'll talk to you again. Tomorrow. Yes. It's only Wednesday. Good. Fantastic. Well, then we'll see you tomorrow.
Fantastic. All righty. Take care. Talk to you tomorrow.
Good. Okay. And let's see. What other things we have lined up for today? Well, a couple of comments along the way. Ricky says she also got a lollipop at the doctor's office right up until her doctor retired about 5 years ago. So well into adulthood, I guess, getting the lollipop after the visit. That's nice. Also reporting that on the CBC News up there in Canada, since we were on the topic, had reported it this morning, at least in brief, that Bannon was held in contempt. But yes, just to straighten that out, the committee voted to report out the recommendation that the full House now vote and hold Bannon in contempt, and then thereafter refer the contempt citation to the Department of Justice for prosecution. So there's still one stage left here in the House, but Greg tells me that that's scheduled for a vote tomorrow. So by the end of the week, it'll be in DOJ's hands, and then we'll start to get, then the writing will start to turn to the question of whether or not DOJ will prosecute, and whether or not Merrick Garland is to blame for that, and what precedent is it that he's following, what precedent is it that he's hoping to set. That was part of the discussion over the weekend that I told you about on Monday when I was talking about the brief blow-up and then the reversal of fortune on that blow-up with the horse whisperer. But that actually would have been a great moment for teaching a little bit on it. The people who were most resistant to hearing about the possibility that the Department of Justice might not actually decide to prosecute. I don't know that the historical record is applicable directly to what's happening in this particular situation. And I do have some current articles to bring up. Perhaps we'll do it right after the break that would have set this discussion up a little bit differently. But we'll do it and tease a little bit of what comes after the break by talking about what happened over the weekend. But lots of resistance from people to the possibility that the Justice Department might not do exactly what we hope they would do, or what we think they would do, or what we think they're compelled to do, because the law on this is being statutory contempt of Congress. The law says, on its face, and it's difficult to understand this if you're not a lawyer or steeped in the practice of congressional contempt and etc. But the law does say that the Justice Department, and usually here we're talking about the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, where of course the Congress sits, shall present a referral like that to a grand jury, which of course is the beginning stages of actually beginning a prosecution. So it would seem like there's no room for, or no wiggle room in this. And then, the horse whisperer was insisting on this, and when he was in his angry mode was saying, I guess you understand shall to mean something other than what the rest of us understand in shall. And I guess that's true. I don't understand shall differently, but I do know what the history is of what the Justice Department has done with the shall and where they've stuck it and what the weather report is there and whether the sun is shining or not. This is, just reality. But, again, it's a little bit like any encounter with internet or Twitter lawyers, that is newly minted lawyers. The difference between what happens in practice and what's on the page is sometimes quite significant. And you only learn that from reading the cases. And sometimes the cases explain why you've departed from what appears to be obvious language very well. Sometimes they offer no explanation whatsoever, or sometimes, even worse, they offer an explanation that's terrible and makes no sense to you whatsoever. But it still happens and still stands as precedent, and you still have to refer to it when you're trying to figure out what the obligations of the DOJ really are and whether or not they're going to meet them as you expect them to be met based on the plain language of the statute. It does say that the DOJ shall present it to a grand jury, but in many cases they just didn't. And what's at work here is trying to reconcile the demands of the law with the overall concept of prosecutorial discretion. And it has consistently been the position of the DOJ as a part of the executive branch that they value prosecutorial discretion more highly than the interpretation of the word shall. Keeping it simple is not that important to them. What's more important to them usually is safeguarding executive branch prerogatives. The difference in the case with Bannon, of course, is that Bannon isn't a executive branch employee, wasn't an executive branch employee when he did what he's being investigated for doing, and of course the person asserting the privilege is no longer the chief executive either. More on that before, even for morons, after this. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Since I promised it, we'll dive back into the question of the contempt referral. I guess we can go a little bit further back in the process just for fun and bring up a series of tweets from our friend Ira Goldman, KD by proxy on Twitter, tweeting about he was watching the proceedings inside the committee yesterday on C-SPAN and shared his observations with everybody. The January 6th committee just voted 9-0 to report to the House a resolution to hold Steve Bannon in contempt. Just in case you were wondering about what's the vehicle here. It's not a contempt citation. They don't write up something that says contempt of Congress and sign it and hand it to the House, and the House, gives the thumbs up. They draft a resolution, just like anything else. You need to express the findings of the committee here. You draft a resolution that says, whereas we're the committee, and whereas Steve Bannon wears 3 shirts at any given time, and whereas he really sucks, and whereas we gave him a subpoena, and whereas he didn't show up for the subpoena, now therefore be it resolved, right? Blah, 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 blah. We find him in contempt of Congress and recommend that it be referred to the Department of Justice for prosecution. I don't know how they worded it. And I think actually it's linked in here if you really were interested in reading the thing, just to know what do they actually write down and what do they actually vote on. In case one of you lands in Congress, you'll want to be sure you're able to do this. Ira then tweets, second part of this same first tweet. For the record, FTR. I guess that's what that's supposed to be. It's not Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is it? That doesn't make any sense. For the record, there was no discussion of the option of having him arrested by the House Sergeant at Arms. Indeed, there was no debate at all. The entire meeting was tightly scripted. Why would there be word of that? Of course, that would be about inherent contempt, and they were proceeding with statutory contempt. the current thinking on the practice with inherent contempt. Well, the current thinking is we don't do that. But to the extent that members of Congress have thought about it at all, well, for one thing, let me just say this. To the extent that members of Congress have thought about it at all, you can thank me for that. And you're welcome. Me and another former member of Congress, Brad Miller of North Carolina, no longer in Congress, but he was one of the early congressional rediscoverers of the inherent contempt concept right around the same time, and we spoke to one another fairly frequently at that point. He was chair of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and in his time there, for various and, as Greg would say, various and sundry reasons, found himself in need of certain documents from the George W. Bush administration, I think regarding the administration of NASA, but may have that wrong. But Science, Space, and Technology Committee had some real questions about how they were administering thus and such a set of programs, and no answers were forthcoming. And it began to worry them that something was being hidden, something that shouldn't have been, that should have been shared with Congress, that wasn't forthcoming, and they were just really, really resistant to handing over the documents. And as chair, Congressman Miller just was exploring all of his options, because he found that when their documents weren't produced, even under subpoena, they had this opportunity to hold the agency in question, or the people working at the agency, in contempt of Congress. And they found very quickly that same loophole that we were just discussing before the break, that upon referring the contempt resolution to the Department of Justice, the George W. Bush Department of Justice found, for whatever reason, that it just had no particular interest in prosecuting the George W. Bush National Aeronautics and Space Administration, if that's who was being targeted here. I can't remember exactly who it was, and I think it was more widespread than that. But at any rate, the agency that was being asked to produce this information was also a George W. Bush administration agency. And one hand washing the other, the Department of Justice said, prosecutorial discretion, we decline to prosecute this case. Normally, prosecutorial discretion is grounded, in its original intent, grounded in affording the idea that you ought to afford the prosecutor's office the leeway to decide whether or not there was a likelihood, a substantial likelihood of getting a conviction. And that if there really wasn't, then it would be a waste of time, and it would be within their discretion to say, yeah, let's not go forward with this waste of time just for political reasons, for instance, or for any other reason for that matter, if we don't think that there's any substantial likelihood of getting a conviction here. I don't know, though, that there really was such a determination made in the George W. Bush administration. And there's nothing, there's no law, and even if there was, you would find that very often the interpretation of the law varies from the language in which the law is originally written and framed, but I don't know if there was any determination made in the George W. Bush administration about the likelihood of getting a conviction. They just simply said, well, I'll tell you what makes it less likely that there'll be a conviction and therefore an embarrassment to the administration. If we don't prosecute, there won't be one. So I can tell you that. So they said, well, prosecutorial discretion doesn't say that this has to be the reason that we exercise the discretion. It just says that we have discretion. Everyone understands that to be the reason we have discretion. But maybe there's other reasons we have discretion, like I don't feel like it. Nobody said that wasn't valid. It's not in the law that that's not valid, so we'll just say it. And, of course, that could be challenged in court, but by the time they straighten that all out, and then even if they do straighten it all out after 2 years of litigation, the best the court can say is, well, we were asked to decide whether or not that's a valid basis for prosecutorial discretion. Let's say that 2 years later we've decided it isn't. the administration can then come back and say, well, okay, what you've said after 2 years of litigation is that the only reason that a prosecutor can decline to bring a case is if the prosecutor reaches the determination that there's very little likelihood of conviction. So we'll just assert that now. And you could try to test that in court. Why, they said that there was very little chance of conviction, but I think there's a great chance of conviction. But then you would just have to litigate that for 2 more years, and then poof, all of a sudden the George W. Bush administration gives way to the Obama administration, and it's all moot. That's the way to drag it out for 4 years. Of course, if it starts early in the George W. Bush administration, as it turns out, you had 8 years to try to press that case. But even so, I suppose then they come back to you go back to litigation, and the prosecutor says, I don't think there's a good chance of conviction. The other guy says, I think there is. And the court probably at that point says, there might literally just be no way to determine which one of you is right. You say there's little chance. You say there's lots of chance. It's a coin toss. We don't know. This is a political question. The executive branch and the legislative branch are just going to have to solve this as between themselves. The court now declines to get involved and dismisses the whole thing under the political question doctrine. So you see, it was going nowhere, especially when, the active current administration is involved. And that's what originally motivated Brad Miller to say, geez, that's not a totally satisfactory outcome. But since the court might ultimately just hand it back to us and say it's a political question to be solved as between the branches, and they do this all the time, well, one way of solving it between the branches is, historically, the executive branch has found a way to come to some accommodation with the legislative branch, because the legislative branch has certain tools to compel the executive branch to move on this thing, and if they work, you'll get your documents in the end, or your testimony. One way to do it, of course, it would have been for Brad Miller to approach his Democratic colleagues, then in the majority, of course, that's what made him chair of this subcommittee, and say, they've been awfully reluctant to comply with our subpoenas over at NASA or whatever administration they were overseeing and not getting answers from. Could have been, I don't know. Well, I can't remember exactly who it was, but it certainly could have been climate related. That's a possibility as well. At any rate, if you can convince your colleagues that, the contempt of Congress thing didn't work because the DOJ wouldn't prosecute the case, and we litigated that for X number of years, and it turns out they don't have to. Even though it says shall, they think they have prosecutorial discretion, and at the very least, they have the ability to tie us up for enough years over the question of what is prosecutorial discretion and how far does it extend to moot our case. One other way, by the way, to moot a case rather more quickly than having the administration go poof and disappear is you can have the Congress that issued the subpoena go poof and disappear. That's a problem too. If you issue a subpoena and you find yourself in 2 years worth of litigation, then all of a sudden the court is now dealing with a subpoena issued by a Congress that no longer exists. That tends to moot the issue too, especially if it's a Congress that's been taken over by the other party and says that they intend to withdraw the subpoena anyway. So, as you can see, unsatisfactory outcome for Brad Miller, and so he said there's got to be another way. If the courts are going to say that the two branches have to work it out, one tool we have is to say, all right, NASA was the one who wouldn't give us the documents. We fund NASA, so we'll do this. We will cut their budget or punish them in some other way, or refuse to, perhaps the Senate in solidarity might refuse to confirm a new NASA administrator or something like that, or rake them over the coals during the hearings and say, we won't vote to confirm you unless you commit to complying with the subpoena issued by the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee's Subcommittee on Investigation. Sometimes that works. When it doesn't, that's when Brad Miller discovered, there's such a thing as inherent contempt. The courts say we have to solve it as between the two branches. They won't intervene. Fine. It's just one of the checks and balances that exists between the executive branch and the legislative branch. We haven't used it in an awful long time because we usually come to another accommodation by refusing to fund you or refusing to approve your nominees that you need to run your department or agency. But where that doesn't work, we'll exercise this power of inherent contempt and just jail you directly. All right, well, that didn't come up and hasn't come up since the 1930s. It's a very uncomfortable thing. A lot of the statutory rules about prosecuting contempt of Congress in federal courts stems from the uncomfortable angle of having to jail people in the name of the United States Congress. It's not something that people remember or understand to be a possibility. So that's why it wasn't discussed at the committee yesterday. Their first option will be to try to prosecute it using the DOJ and federal courts. But yeah, even if you think about it for just a second in terms of, the basic civics of it that you might have learned early on in your schooling, the three branches being separate, right? But being co-equal branches of government, and one supposedly can't compel another to do its work for it or to knuckle under to their demands. They have to work it out however the power dynamics between them shake out. And so, originally speaking, I guess, if Congress wanted to do this stuff and compel testimony, they didn't want, and the framers of the Constitution didn't require, that they lean on the courts or the Justice Department, which would be the other two branches, to enforce co-equal power on behalf of the Congress. That Congress should have the power, and indeed constitutionally had to have the power, to be able to do it all by itself and not rely on another branch to do it. But statutory contempt was created because people were much more in tune with the idea of, trial and punishment being meted out by federal courts or prosecuted by the Justice Department. The people were used to seeing doing this stuff instead of members of Congress who hadn't done it for a long, long time. So that's how the statutory contempt rules got established in the first place. And again, why there was no discussion of the House Sergeant at Arms. So what else did Ira have to say? He actually had a 3-tweet series. That was the last of the 3 tweets. But he also includes up top, here is the January 6th committee's draft report recommending Bannon be held in contempt for not complying with its subpoena. It also calls for a criminal referral to DOJ, but sadly there's not even a mention of sending the Sergeant at Arms to arrest Bannon, and that's because they don't need it. They're working in a totally different system here. Actually, I'm surprised that didn't occur to Ira, but he's a Senate guy, not a House guy. So here's the report. He gives us the report accompanying the resolution, as they style it, resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Stephen K. G.B. Bannon in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with the subpoena duly issued by the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Whew. Okay. Mr. Thompson of Mississippi from the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol submitted the following report. And this, it's funny, this is advertised by Ira here as the, I guess I thought he was showing us the resolution, but this is the report about it. And I don't know, is there more to it, or is this just the front page of it? The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, having considered this report, reports favorably thereon and recommends that the report be approved. The form of the resolution that the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol would recommend to the House of Representatives for citing Stephen K. Bannon for contempt of Congress pursuant to this report is as follows. Okay, so what they've done here is they've issued a report that says the House should vote on a resolution that has the following words in it. I think there were probably other options. They could have written the resolution themselves and adopted, passed the resolution, marked it up, and reported it to the House along with a report. And I'm not certain that they didn't do that, But I guess the other option is to simply issue a report and say, when you read this report, it will tell you what words you should put in a resolution to present to the full House. So I guess that's what they'll do. The resolution will say, as we mentioned, this is all just the resolved stuff here. There's no whereas clauses in this for whatever reason. They just get right to business. The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, having considered this report. All right, yes, we read that. Says that the resolution should read as follows. Resolved that Stephen K. Bannon shall be found to be in contempt of Congress for failure to comply with a congressional subpoena. Resolved that pursuant to 2 U.S. Code sections 192 and 194, the Speaker of the House of Representatives shall certify the report of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, huff puff, detailing the refusal of Stephen K. Bannon to produce documents or appear for a deposition before the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, as directed by subpoena, to the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, to the end that Mr. Bannon be proceeded against in the manner and form provided by law. And resolved that the Speaker of the House shall otherwise take all appropriate action to enforce the subpoena. So that's where we stand with that. I wonder if there's more. We could look it up. There's a link. We'll see how much longer it is before we decide to read any more of it. Well, the report itself is very long. Is there any more substance to the resolution? No, that would be the entirety of the resolution that they recommend. Okay, that's fine. Then the report, I guess, is about, it documents all of the procedure that they used. Why did they want to talk to Bannon? What methods did they use to try to reach Bannon? What did they vote on, and what was the vote to issue the subpoena, and then what happened with the subpoena, and then what was the vote in terms of referring it to the House, et cetera, et cetera. How long is this thing? I mean, if you really wanted to read all the paperwork, including all the appendices on this, you would be reading some 26 pages, including the minority report, if there is one on this. And I don't know, I guess if you're bored today and can't go outside, I would recommend you sit down and read it, because it's always fun to read through those documents and just see how much paper gets wasted in all of this. But that's how you do it. The January 6th committee, Ira continues, is scheduled to take up the Bannon contempt resolution on Tuesday. They did do that, convening at an unusual time for a committee that isn't the House Rules Committee, 7:30 p.m. That was kind of unusual. But not for the Rules Committee, for whatever reason. They like to do their stuff at night. So there's the notice for it. And then if you want to read background materials for tonight's, or the other night's, Tuesday night's 7:30 p.m. meeting on the contempt resolution against Steve Bannon, the January 6th committee has kindly posted links to 6 documents. What are those documents? There's the report on the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Stephen K. Bannon in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. That's just document 1. Document 2, exhibits, by the way. 1, the Select Committee's subpoena and attachments to Mr. Bannon. This is the one we sent him. Exhibit 2 is an email exchange between the Select Committee staff and Robert J. Costello, who's Mr. Bannon's attorney. Come in for an interview. No, we won't. Okay. Even pursuant to subpoena? Yes, that's correct. Exhibit 3, Mr. Costello's letter to the Select Committee staff in response to the subpoena on October 7th. Exhibit 4 is Chairman Thompson's letter in response to Mr. Costello on October 8th. And Exhibit 5 is a reply to the chairman's letter from Costello on October 13th, basically saying, no, we're not going to do anything, and our refusal is now final, and you're clear to go ahead and start with the contempt already. And so they did. There you have it. That's where we stand paperwork-wise. Politico, yesterday, publishing this report under an unusual headline. You know, it's like trying to put a cloud over the whole thing. The headline, House hopes to defy history in criminal contempt case against Bannon. Subheader, the January 6th panel voted Tuesday to hold him in contempt. Things will get complicated from here. We explained all the complication before we got here. Kyle Cheney, Josh Gerstein wrote the piece. They're generally, decent reporters. I don't think they had any ulterior motives in titling the piece the way they did. But I guess the idea here is to show how difficult it's been in the past for the House to actually enforce subpoenas through the statutory contempt process, which is what Brad Miller learned early on. But you learned earlier today that the reason Brad Miller had such difficulty, and others before him and since have had such difficulty doing that, is because ultimately using statutory contempt means relying on the current administration's Justice Department. If you are trying to prosecute for contempt of Congress a member of the current administration or someone who the current administration has some interest in protecting for whatever reason, you're going to run into trouble. And historically, the record shows you end up, if not losing, being frustrated for long enough that it doesn't matter if you win eventually, that you win, because so much time has passed that it's no longer a live subject once you finally win. That has been the history of attempting to enforce contempt charges by the Congress. However, that's not the situation we face now. So it's a little different. Not that the writing on it was any different or reflected any of that. The House's push to prosecute Steve Bannon for defying its January 6th investigators relies on a law that hasn't produced a conviction in decades and could take years to litigate. We explained that. Welcome to Criminal Contempt of Congress. It's going to be messy. Contempt is one of the House's only tools to punish witnesses who refuse to cooperate, but it's riddled with legal loopholes and ambiguities that could allow Donald Trump's allies to bury the January 6th Select Committee in Byzantine court challenges without ever producing new evidence about the former president's effort to overturn the 2020 election. The committee has a tough row to hoe. That's the way he put it. Said former House Counsel Stan Brand, who helped orchestrate the referral of the then EPA chief, to the Justice Department for criminal contempt of Congress in 1982. You have no clear, easy path to compliance. And indeed, there was no easy, clear path to compliance in that case. Remember again, it was a referral to the Justice Department of the then EPA chief. That means the EPA chief in the 1982 Reagan administration, but being referred for prosecution to the Department of Justice under the very same Reagan administration. That's where the conflict opens. You got a current administration being asked to prosecute itself. That rarely works out well. And that's the historical backdrop. But again, that's not where we are now. Bannon's not an executive branch employee. And even if he was, it's a different executive. You'd have the Biden DOJ deciding on whether or not to prosecute a Trump executive branch employee, if he was one, which he isn't. So that's an additional layer of weakness in their case. By the way, just in case you didn't make the connection, the then EPA chief that they're referring to here, that Stan Brand helped orchestrate the referral regarding, was Ann Gorsuch, or later Ann Burford. Ann Gorsuch is, in fact, in case you didn't remember from earlier in the show or you didn't make the connection, not a lot of Gorsuches, I don't think, running around in D.C., but one of them rings a bell. Neil Gorsuch, Supreme Court Justice, that's his mom. So presumably from an early age, he had certain feelings about whether or not statutory contempt prosecutions on behalf of Congress was some sort of legislative overreach in dealing with the executive branch. And maybe he heard it from mom. But he's just one of 9, and I don't know how influential he is. But then other people on the court are probably committed to voting in favor of Donald Trump no matter what happens. All right. Advocates for criminal contempt say that its successful use isn't measured in completed prosecutions, but rather in its ability to persuade a target to cooperate. For example, congressional Democrats say the threat of contempt helped bring former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former Attorney General William Barr to the negotiating table last year after they initially refused to provide documents and testimony to the House in separate investigations. And that's true. That's the part we were talking about the courts saying, well, why don't you two political branches work it out amongst yourselves? There are other tools you have to do that. But coaxing cooperation will get complicated with Bannon, whom January 6th investigators say had crucial communications with Trump in the run-up to the attack on the Capitol. Bannon has lodged a claim of executive privilege. We know it's kind of flimsy, but it's likely to force the committee into possibly years-long litigation.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It's come to my attention that we started the music a little bit late on the break, and so I was following until the music end point, but as it turns out, we probably missed the last 2 seconds or so of reading from the Politico article, but we were going to repeat that anyway, probably, just to reset the stage. We had just been reading that coaxing cooperation, which is the usual method of enforcing compliance, even if they don't go the prosecution route, gets complicated with Bannon, whom the January 6th investigators say had crucial communications with Trump in the run-up to the attack on the Capitol. Bannon has lodged a claim of executive privilege that, no matter how flimsy, is likely to force the committee into possibly years-long litigation. Or it could go very quickly, actually, because it's so flimsy. That itself would become intertwined with Trump's own lawsuit aimed at quashing the select panel's authority. That, too, not likely to go anywhere, I don't think. And Bannon indicated no willingness to deal with the panel until those legal matters are sorted out. Another big difference, I guess, between Steve Bannon being held in contempt and dealing with him under subpoena versus dealing with then current executive branch officials is that typically, when the statute was designed, typically the executive branch officials had a vested interest in the actual, continued and relatively dignified functioning of government. Certainly even an executive branch official, but one who was no longer in office, and in fact the administration that employed him no longer being in office, maybe that usual feeling of obligation towards the efficient and mature functioning of government disappears to some extent. But usually, there's still some feeling of attachment to the United States government even after serving in it. And once your tenure is through, you're interested generally in the continued efficient operations of government. But now that's kind of out the window. And it has been for a while, I guess, especially among Republicans who, grow up believing that government is a bad thing generally anyway. And they've been more bold in testing the assumptions or ignoring entirely the assumptions that usually underlie the design of the entire scheme. We will allow for statutory prosecution of, or at least the possibility of statutory prosecutions of members of the executive branch by DOJ on behalf of Congress, with the understanding that, for the most part, people who serve in government or in and around government take it seriously. They didn't anticipate, certainly the Trump era, but unfortunately it predates the Trump era and goes all the way back to the Reagan administration. There were people who say, I understand that you have this power, or you think you have this power, but I'm going to make you play it out formally, and I'm going to show you how weak the system can be when at every turn we just determined to say, well, so what? Make me. And the system was supposed to have the opportunity to make you do things. And that's, I guess, how they rediscovered inherent contempt. We realize now that statutory contempt really doesn't have any tools for dealing with people who say, oh, yeah, make me. However, that's okay because Congress retains the power to actually make them. It's outside of the statutory contempt scheme. It's inherent contempt. But that is supposed to back up the statutory contempt threat. Why should I comply with their subpoena under the statutory contempt procedure if there's no mechanism for them to arrest me unless the Justice Department in the administration that I work for agrees to throw me in jail, which they won't. And the answer is Congress can do it itself. So you might as well just stay in the court system where at least you are, presumably guaranteed something approaching a fair trial by standards that most people understand, and don't have to, let's say, instead face trial by a partisan body in Congress that's opposed to you and opposed to the administration you work for and might like very much to throw you in jail. Except then they forgot that, Democrats are going to be afraid to do it because it's highly unusual and hasn't been done for a long time. Whereas Republicans, and in particular now MAGA Trump Republicans, would love it. They chant for it at their rallies. So we're on a little bit of an uneven playing field here. Anyway, let's continue with the Politico article. Where were we? Yes, we were saying, all right. I guess one extra point on all this is add to all this that Bannon has never cared at all about continuity of government or the importance of efficiently running a federal government and having respect for its power and procedures. He's all about undoing as much of that as possible. So he's somebody who, even if he really doesn't have any information at all about Trump and the planning of January 6th, even if all that were actually true, he would still insist that he did have it so that he could cause this kind of trouble and look important and F things up. So it's a very unique case. And they ought to keep him on a very short leash. And they might, because again, it's not his guy in charge of the Department of Justice at the moment. All right, so anyway, where were we? There's not really any way to get this resolved in litigation on the timeline the committee is operating on, said Lisa Kern Griffin, a Duke University criminal law expert. Once the House holds Bannon in contempt, a vote planned for Thursday, according to multiple Democrats familiar with the discussions, DOJ will take over January 6th committee members. Oh, I see. Okay. All right. There's a period in there. I was wondering where is this going? Okay. So once the vote on Thursday happens, DOJ will take over, period. January 6th committee members have uniformly expressed hope, and it's only hope, that Attorney General Merrick Garland will share their urgency, or their sense of urgency anyway, in holding Bannon accountable for his defiance of their subpoena. Biden added to Hill Democrats' excitement when he responded to a reporter's question Friday, saying that those who defy the select committee should be prosecuted. This is how I ended up in a conversation over the weekend. DOJ quickly issued a statement emphasizing that prosecution decisions would be made independently of the White House. Usually we like that, right? And indeed, despite the left's elation, at potential accountability for Bannon, Liz Cheney's not the left, right? We all know that. But she's equally elated at the potential accountability for Bannon. Anyway, legal experts say prosecution for contempt is a much tougher call than it appears. since at least the Reagan administration. Gorsuch. There has not been a successful prosecution under the criminal contempt statute, said Thomas Spulak, S-P-U-L-A-K, Spulak, another former House counsel, like Stan Brand. Although there may be political alignment, there are institutional considerations involving DOJ, one of which is whether Garland wants to be drawn into a continuation of the Trump administration subpoena battles. The January 6th committee laid out its case for criminal contempt of Bannon in a 26-page report. Then I thought it was 16, but maybe I've misread. On Monday night, and the panel voted unanimously to hold Bannon in contempt in a Tuesday evening vote. Yeah, maybe it was 26 pages. All right, well, you can go and read it if you feel like it. Mr. Bannon stands alone in his complete defiance of our subpoena. That's not acceptable. No one in this country, no matter how wealthy or how powerful, is above the law. Left unaddressed, this defiance may encourage others to follow Mr. Bannon down the same path. No doubt about that, said Chair Benny Thompson of Mississippi. There is no reasonable argument that Mr. Bannon's communications with the president regarding January 6th are the type of matters on which privilege can be asserted, the panel wrote in its report. Also, the Select Committee is confident that no executive privilege assertion would bar Mr. Bannon's testimony regarding his communications directly with the president regarding January 6th because the privilege is qualified and could be overcome. Some legal experts who helped House Democrats argue against criminal contempt charges for then IRS official Lois Lerner in 2014 said Bannon's case is so clear-cut that it's worth bringing sanctions against him, even if it doesn't result in getting the testimony they're seeking. And it likely wouldn't, unless they went the civil contempt route and said, we're going to hold him in jail until he testifies, which we discussed the other day. But nobody's discussing doing that at this point. But Lois Lerner came up in the discussions here on over the weekend with Horse Whisperer, where he was saying you must have a different understanding of what the word shall means. And again, like I said, this is the difference between, reading the law and studying the law and reading the cases. I can read the law says X. How is it applied? Got to read the cases and understand the cases in order to know about that. We've explained at great length today, and of course we did over the weekend as well, why it's not usually the case that a current administration would prosecute its own people. And here we get to engage in a little bit of both-siderism. Both sides have, in fact, done this. But for Horse Whisperer and others to stand there and say shall means shall, then you say, well, okay, but what has been the practice? Yes, there have been Republicans who have defied this, and we've been mad about it. But don't forget that for a while there, Republicans had control of the House, and they held Lois Lerner in contempt of Congress, and they referred the charges to the DOJ just the same way, except, of course, Lois Lerner was an IRS official in the Obama administration, and the Obama Justice Department was handed the referral and decided just the same way that the Reagan administration did, and George H.W. Bush later, and George W. Bush as well. They decided, well, we're just not going to prosecute one of our own. Prosecutorial discretion. Sorry, it's not going to happen. And my guess is that, most Democrats thought that was great. Even if they thought that the non-prosecution of Republicans in the past was not so great. But that's the reason. It wasn't so much value judgment on how great prosecutorial discretion is, but just a reminder that it existed. Do you remember when Lois Lerner was held in contempt? Yes. Do you remember seeing her prosecuted? No. Well, the law said shall then, just the same as it says shall now. Did the prosecution happen? No, it didn't. I don't mean that you have to support that outcome just because it happened during the Obama administration. All I'm saying is that happened. It said shall, and nothing happened. It shan't, as it turned out. It didn't go. So not only is it not what it appears to be, practice and history of the statute is not what it reads, but yeah, administrations of both sides have, in fact, done it. Anyway, let's continue on here with the Politico article. If such conduct is not responded to, like Bannon, then what incentive does anyone have ever to obey a lawful order, said Sam Buell, a former federal prosecutor who worked on the government's case against energy giant Enron. Griffin, the Duke legal expert, noted that criminal contempt charges could move forward even if the January 6th committee disbands after the 2022 elections. Though that move wouldn't yield testimony, it could still send a message that defying congressional subpoenas has consequences. Or, of course, it could all be dismissed as moot. That's another possibility. The history of congressional contempt proceedings is replete with cases that landed on DOJ's doorstep only to be rejected. That's what I was saying. A Republican-led House's contempt referral against Attorney General Eric Holder got refused in 2012. That seems... I don't think you could illustrate it any more clearly, of course. Again, Eric Holder at the time was the Attorney General, and they delivered a contempt referral to the Department of Justice, where he's the chief. What did you think his decision was going to be? But also it happened in 2008, when DOJ argued on behalf of two Bush White House officials fighting a congressional demand for information. Do you remember who they were, by the way? I think we were talking about Andrew Card and Harriet Miers at that time. Just said, no, we're not going to do it. Stan Brand, remember him from the beginning of the article, was House counsel when lawmakers pursued documents and testimony from then EPA head, boom, here it is, Ann Gorsuch Burford, the mother of Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. But DOJ argued against the subpoenas on her behalf. The fight ultimately led to her resignation, after which she cut a deal with the House. A bargain was struck. You see, we didn't have to decide it in the courts. The most recent charged and convicted criminal contempt of Congress cases occurred in the 1970s, when the Watergate scandal broke. And Watergate figures G. Gordon Liddy and Richard Kleindienst. Is that right? I don't think I've discussed his name before, were convicted and pleaded guilty, respectively, for refusing to answer congressional questions. Former CIA Director Richard Helms was given a suspended sentence and fined $2,000 under the same statute in 1977. Before that, many of the contempt cases arose from the House Un-American Activities Committee, and several convictions stemming from those cases were later overturned because of procedural failures. Democrats say Bannon's conduct is particularly brazen because he is refusing to answer any of the committee's questions. Indeed, he declined to show up at all to his October 14th deposition. In that respect, his actions parallel claims from Trump and George W. Bush White House officials who insisted they had absolute immunity, remember that, from congressional subpoenas and did not even have to turn up. Lawyers say the Supreme Court's decision last year over a House demand for Trump's financial records has undercut the sweeping privilege claims that Trump and Bannon are making. In that case, the justices unanimously rejected Trump's claim of absolute immunity. It's not a thing, you see. However, they also set up a complex test for the courts to apply in congressional subpoena cases, one Trump has already leaned on to bolster his own lawsuit against the January 6th committee. Democrats contend that Trump's departure from office and the fact that Bannon was only an informal advisor to Trump on January 6th further undercut the executive privilege claims, but the courts have not indicated that either of those facts is fatal. Hasn't come up yet, I don't think, so they haven't had a chance to rule. If Bannon were charged under the misdemeanor contempt statute, prosecutors would have to prove that Bannon, quote, willfully defied Congress. That could be difficult to show since he appears to have legal advice from his own attorney and Trump's lawyers that he has a valid legal argument against the subpoena. His lawyer has said Bannon would comply if ordered to by a court. So that's an interesting position to take, right? And here again, just to weigh in on the prosecutorial discretion question, if the original intent of prosecutorial discretion is stuck to, and it's, well, only bring cases that you think you have a really good chance of getting a conviction on. And then they argue, well, if we're charging him under misdemeanor contempt, we'd have to show that Bannon willfully defied Congress. And apparently the argument goes, well, it wasn't that he did it of his own volition and he wasn't going to talk to Congress under any circumstances and wanted to. He didn't want to. He didn't want to have to defy them. It's just that he was given legal advice that he ought to and that he was entitled to. And he was following legal advice as opposed to simply saying, I'm not going to do it for other reasons. He would love to say that and test that, and he may yet, but so far that hasn't been the case. Those mitigating, and if therefore, if they had to show willfulness and thought that they couldn't because it's just his word against ours, was it willful? No, it wasn't. All right, well, there goes our chances of convicting him. He has to essentially admit that it was willful in order for us to be able to get that conviction. And he's not likely to do that, and we don't have any documents in which he said, I'm willfully defying Congress, by the way. Should I later deny that, you should not believe me. If we had a document like that, we could get a conviction, but we don't. And if we don't think that, if we think he's just going to say it wasn't willful and that will be enough for the court, then maybe under prosecutorial discretion, as originally intended, we don't go ahead because it's not going to go anywhere. We'll read the rest of this article here. Those mitigating factors could also prompt DOJ to decline to charge him in the first place. That's what I just told you. The criminal statute requires proof of the elements of the offense, each and every one of them, beyond a reasonable doubt, said Brand. They're going to have some interesting conversations inside the U.S. Attorney's Office. I don't know which way they'll go. On the other hand, Bannon's privilege claim covering personal and political activities without any connection to Trump appears particularly flimsy. Prosecutors might consider Bannon's refusal to answer those questions so unwarranted that it invites the criminal charge. Some experts and members of Congress themselves have looked at the legal landscape and wondered if it's time for lawmakers to dust off their most severe power. Oh, very severe, this power. What is that most severe power? Everyone knows it. Let's all say it together. Inherent contempt. Makes it into the article. That's good news. You're welcome. That process allows the House to directly arrest and fine recalcitrant witnesses. One of my favorite phrases. At least initially bypassing the judiciary and taking matters into their own hands. Several January 6th committee members have noted that inherent contempt is on the table, even though House lawyers have been reluctant to consider it because of the extreme conflict it would provoke. That hasn't happened in over 80 years. I know, said Spulak. Maybe it's time to revisit it. Maybe. And I certainly spent plenty of time revisiting it, and you can find, we'll dust off those old Daily Kos posts that were titled, as I recall, it's time to dust off inherent contempt. That must be from when? I don't even remember. I think I've showed them before and we've discussed them before. But let's see. I think that was the title. Dust off inherent contempt. Dusting off inherent contempt. There it is. Daily Kos. March 27th, 2007. I was writing about it. And explain all about the EPA case from 1982 in that one too. And by the way, in my various adventures in discussing inherent contempt and writing about it and talking about it with people online and with members of Congress, we did come along at one point against the an interview with Henry Waxman, Congressman Henry Waxman, who was then the chair of the House Government Oversight Committee, like the chief oversight guy in the House under the Democrats, and asked him about that. And what about going the inherent contempt route, since there's no serious chance that the George W. Bush DOJ is going to prosecute George W. Bush administration executive officials for you. And he said, what the hell's that? I never heard of that. Is that a real thing? You can't really just take somebody and hold them in contempt yourself and put them in jail on your order as Congress. Yeah, you can. It just hasn't happened for a very long time. It hasn't happened so long that members for whom that's supposed to be a key tool in the bag of tricks. Even if you don't use it, it's supposed to underlie your statutory contempt claims. It's supposed to provide the basis for worrying about being imprisoned, even if you think the current Department of Justice won't do it because you're on the same side. That's what's supposed to make you take this whole thing seriously. Okay, so anyway, I think Politico, generally speaking, I guess the headline makes it sound like, oh, well, we're in the same position on Bannon that we have been in all previous prosecutions against actual executive branch officials in contempt of Congress proceedings, and we are not. And they would have done well, I think, to have mentioned that. I guess we can close things out with even more stupid stuff about this, because no one will give you such an intense education or bore you to death as thoroughly as we will on this question. A Yahoo News article, Michael Isikoff. Hey, how about that? Writing this piece. Adam Schiff, vehemently, it says in quotes here, disagrees with Attorney General Garland's reluctance to pursue Trump. This isn't directly on point with Bannon, but for all the people who are wondering what will the Garland Biden DOJ do with Bannon, they're worried that his general reluctance to pursue Trump on other fronts will result in a reluctance to pursue Trump's acolytes in the person of even as loathsome a person as Steve Bannon. In unusually pointed comments about a member of President Biden's cabinet, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff says he vehemently disagrees with Attorney General Merrick Garland's failure to so far aggressively investigate former President Donald Trump for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election and other matters, like stuff we impeached him for instance. Appearing Tuesday on the Yahoo News Skullduggery podcast, the California Democrat was asked about the Garland Justice Department's reluctance to launch investigations of the former president based on the 2018 report by former special counsel Robert Mueller that spelled out Trump's efforts to obstruct the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. See also today's news about the FBI raid on Oleg Deripaska's mansion. We should read some more about that tomorrow, perhaps. Or maybe we save it for Friday. Trump's efforts to obstruct the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the end of the previous sentence. In a new book. Oh no, another book. Midnight in Washington, How We Almost Lost Our Democracy and Still Could. Schiff, it's his book, I guess, writes that he viewed Mueller's report as providing, quote, a factual basis to charge the president with multiple crimes of obstruction, unquote. Remember when the excuse was, well, Mueller isn't going to prosecute these things himself. He will lay out the case that prosecutors could make against Trump, but obviously the Trump DOJ isn't going to pursue these things. But the next Democratic president and his or her DOJ might very well do such a thing. And of course, people who have been through this ringer before doubted it. And so far it looks like they're right, but we don't want to be. I think there's a real desire on the part of the Attorney General, for the most part, not to look backward. Oh, no. Yeah, well, that's the phrase. Schiff said in response, do I disagree with that? I do disagree with that, and I disagree with it most vehemently when it comes to what I consider even more serious offenses. For example, a taped conversation of Donald J. Trump on the phone with Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State from Georgia, trying to coerce him into fraudulently finding 11,780 votes. Because I think if you or I did that, we'd be under indictment by now, Schiff added. In my view, you don't ignore the crimes that have been committed by a president of the United States. They need to be investigated. You may reach the judgment once you've investigated something that the public interest in not prosecuting a former president outweighs the interests of justice. But I don't think you could ignore the crimes. Schiff's comments came as the January 6th Select Committee, of which he is also a member, right? Good to note. is prepared to vote Tuesday night. They've already done it, of course, to hold former Trump aide Steve Bannon in contempt for refusing to comply with the subpoena for testimony and documents relating to his conversations with Trump, as well as his advisors and lawyers about their efforts to block Congress's certification of the Electoral College results that Joe Biden won last November's election. Bannon's lawyer said his client was responding to a request from the former president to refuse cooperation on the grounds that any advice Bannon gave was confidential and covered by executive privilege. Except he didn't work for the executive branch. That would help. But Schiff said Bannon's claims were without merit, and that once the committee votes to hold Bannon in contempt, he expects the full House to vote to refer the matter to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution. The Speaker will refer to the Justice Department, where the statute says the Justice Department has the duty to present it to the grand jury. Schiff said now that duty is not always fulfilled, but there are some very positive signs that it will be fulfilled. It really needs to be. Well, I think so too. So we're in agreement on that. And we're in agreement on what the history has been. Just thought I would bring you up to speed on all of the reasoning behind that. Now you too can have a lengthy argument and or discussion with the Horse Whisperer or anyone else you care to engage with on this subject. You're more informed here than you will be anywhere else on this subject. I can virtually promise you that.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
It's time to stop listening to Kagro in the Morning and listen instead to Justice Putnam, also still in the morning, but leading you all the way into the afternoon. And here's what he's got on tap for you. Well, let's see. A U.S. Congresswoman, we'll find out who, said there is momentum on our side in the spending bill negotiations that Manchin and Sinema want to blow up. Want to find out about that momentum and who said it? Next.